Tony DeAngelo back here on Connecticut Morning, and it is the April 9, 2013 edition. We're bumped in by Rick Nelson doing You're Kind of Loving. I guess sun and summer and sunshine and this wonderful day in New Haven, and weather we are not used to seeing in any way, shape, or form. We are so pleased and so honored to be joined by a gentleman whom I have admired over the time I have known him, Paul Assaiante, the Trinity College squash coach in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a former professional squash player with a long resume, a 1974 graduate of Springfield College, holding a master's degree from Long Island University. His coaching experience includes stints at the United States Military Academy, Williams College. For years he was coach of the Hartford Fox Force, a World Team Tennis Championship team headed by Monica Seles and Marty Fish. From 1999 to 2003, doing that. In 2010, Assaiante coached both the United States squash team, which competed in the Pan American Games, and the USA men's team, which played in the World Championships. In his years as the Trinity College squash head coach, the Bantams have won an incredible amount of games. A winning percentage is absolutely fantastic, and a fantastic record in NCAA appearances. Paul, it's our honor. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. You know, I'm curious about something. You have a great history in, shall we say, paddle sports, squash, tennis. When you were growing up, were you a baseball fan, a football fan? Did you play some basketball? Were there favorite teams you had, growing up?
Well, it's funny. I really came to this very backwards. I was born in the Bronx and had never been in a country club until I was about 29. I was a gymnast in college. I think I'm the only guy in the Springfield College Hall of Fame that was cut by his coach 3 times, which just shows you that I'm not a very bright guy. And so I was, in 1972, the Olympic gymnastics team was training at West Point, and I was up there training with them, and they said, in 2 years, there'll be an assistant coaching job open here. How would you like it? And I said, well, that'd be great. So 2 years later, I go up to be the gymnastics assistant, and they say, oh, by the way, you have to enlist in the Army now. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the reason I went to college was so that I didn't have to go to the Army. Actually not. But anyway, I ended up at West Point, and I learned tennis there. The coach who was the Davis Cup coach quit, and I applied for the job. I had no right to get it. They offered it to 7 other people, all of whom turned it down. So they were stuck with me. They took me downstairs and they said, and oh, by the way, this is a squash court. And I'd never seen a squash court before, and now I was the head squash coach at West Point.
It's fascinating. So being a coach, I mean, it seems like you kind of got into that accidentally, or so it seems.
Well, certainly into tennis and squash, it was completely by accident. I always knew I wanted to be a coach, and really, to be honest with you, coaching is coaching. If tomorrow the athletic director came up to me and said, you got to coach wrestling, I'd go buy a book on wrestling and learn a little bit about whizzers and takedowns, and then I would coach wrestling, because it's really just about getting the most out of young people every day. And it doesn't really matter what the discipline is. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's just getting kids, young people, to be better every day.
And that's interesting. Now, given your long career, from the very first teams you had to perhaps your most recent team, what are the changes you've noticed in young people mentally, socially, culturally, attention spans? You tell me, where do you begin?
Well, I hate to be negative, but I think I have to be. First of all, the athletes that are coming to us have been given way, way more opportunity, so their skill sets and their performance levels have jumped markedly. Unfortunately, in the name of love, our parents out there, me included, are not giving our youngsters enough ownership over the journey. And so what's happening is these kids are coming to us now, and they're a little bit crippled in that they haven't developed the survival skills to deal with adversity. they haven't learned how to own the journey. I'll never forget talking to Billie Jean King when we were writing my book, and she said, you know, Paul, when I told my parents I wanted to turn pro, they said fine, and they provided me the opportunity, but my dad taking a second job. But they didn't come to any more matches than they had come before. It was mine to own. And what's happening now is we have this issue of helicopter parents, actually Velcro parents, where the kids come, but they don't know how to adjust to winning and losing and adversity. And they look much more put together, but then they fall apart like porcelain dolls the first time they face adversity. And so we, in the world of education, really need to be more prepared to help them understand it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. You know, it's okay to change on the fly. When we were growing up in our generations, it wasn't that way. Parents were, if my father and mom drove me to practice, that was lucky. I usually rode my bicycle there, and I don't know how many things they were able to go to. Now, the parent is chirping in the coach's ear about playing time and those sorts of things. So the kids look very different to me. They're much more skilled. The sport level has gone way up, but they're much less equipped to deal with the challenges that life really is going to present them.
Isn't that something? Now, is this, I don't know, did this start with like the Sesame Street and the Mr. Rogers culture, do you think? I'm just trying to think of, you know, it's so chicken and egg, I really can't put my finger on it.
Well, I think what happened was, you know, the generation before, I'm old, but the generation before me had to scrape and claw and didn't have very much. First generations in the United States, people like that. Mm-hmm. And so for them, their children's sporting experiences were something that they were affording us. Then our parents, or rather we, were in a better situation. We wanted to provide more of an opportunity for our kids, more of an investment, if you will, in their future. I mean, I gave a speech recently in Greenwich, and we were talking about what's a balanced youngster. And I said, you know, a balanced youngster is when you open the garage door, you see a skateboard, a hockey stick, a tennis racket, maybe a box of summer reading books, you know, a pogo stick. That's a balanced child. When you open up the garages now, you see 10 tennis rackets, or you see 3 hockey sticks. You don't see the balance and the diversity and the development of young people that you used to see in the past because they're being forced to specialize so early. And it's hurting the culture of our young people's development.
It's incredibly, you know, such a heavy thought because the guest that was on before you, Jim Dreyer, who's a writer and a sports commentator, we talked about that whole thing of going to the sports in season and how every season brought a new sport and you became adjusted to that and you look forward. And I mean, what you're really saying is a lot of what you get are, for lack of a better term, one-trick ponies.
Well, yeah, we're in the age of specialization. I'm still sort of a renaissance man. I like multiple sports. I think children should have seasons. I think that the more things they experience, the better. However, at some juncture, I think when the youngster's interest starts to drive the cart, then you can begin focusing singularly or maybe for 2 activities for the youngsters. So this summer I had a 10-year-old parent of a 10-year-old come to me and say, do you think Johnny has what it takes? And my answer was, who cares if he has what it takes? Does he have passion? Is he excited about what he's doing? Does he love what he's doing? That's what you want to foster in your children. I think there should be 20 different types of balls laying around on the floor and books and computers. I think we need to broaden our young people's experience. And then when they start to get into their late, early teens, let them dictate what activity they're enjoying. I think it should be all driven by passion. I'd rather see a tone-deaf child who loves the piano play the piano than to see the fastest youngster in school run track and field if they hate every second of it. That's not good for anyone's development.
And you know, this would probably lead us to what I like to call the next logical step, which is I so much lock in and agree to your concept of, yeah, it's got to be fun, but then it is, you have this winning legacy with this team, and I'm sure you get asked all the time, winning must be really important to you, Paul, and how do you answer that?
It's important to me only in terms of my desire to provide the young men the opportunity to taste success. I could care less. I didn't come here to win national championships. I came here to be a small part of young people's lives, and then ultimately perhaps have lifelong relationships with them afterwards. For instance, you know, there's a coach down at Yale, Dave Talbot, who's a colleague of mine. I mean, those kids love him. They stay in touch with him. You know, he goes to their weddings and their births.
Isn't that
that's
nice?
what we do. That's our paycheck. If it's about winning and losing, then you're likely to make some, I think, mistakes along the way. You learn more in losing than you learn in winning. When you lose, you stop and you look in the mirror and you say, whoa, what happened there? But when you win, you're on to the next contest. It's just human nature. And so I would like for the boys to experience winning. This past year was the coolest experience of my life professionally. But it doesn't really, in the long run, matter all that much to their development as people. In 15 years, when they come back for reunion, they're not going to remember the record of the season. They're not going to remember how they played against the number 5 guy from Princeton. They're going to remember their teammates. They're going to remember the drive in the snow when we went up to Williamstown that year. Those are the things that make them better people in life. Winning is not all that important to me. We've just been fortunate.
And it's quite a legacy, and when you think of the cultures and you think of the various kids you've had, we've talked about this in the past, and you've had kids literally of every stripe. You've had kids of warring nations. You've had kids that, at least on paper, you would think would be so diametrically opposed to one another that, you know, you wouldn't want them on the same team, let alone in the same school. And for our folks that are listening here for the first time, I just want you to recount some of your experiences and some of your life lessons with this, which I know are a continuum and a work in progress as you go forward.
Well, yeah, we do. We had 11 different countries represented in our program last year, and it's the different ingredients that make the soup so tasty. And so we sit these boys down on the first day of practice, and we just simply say, "These are your brothers. This is your family." And when you're born, you don't get to choose your brother. So bottom line is, you've got to get along. You've got to have his back. You've got to care as much about his performance as you care about your own. You know, we have guys on the team from Pakistan and India who are best friends. Those parents are not talking to each other in their countries. I mean, we're really colorblind in our program. You can imagine when 9/11 happened. I had boys on my team that were Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, Zoroastrians. Some of the images being flashed on the television screen looked very much like the boys on our team. You can imagine what a nervous moment in our history was at that time. And these kids just honestly love each other. The first young man I recruited from South Africa, I had a professor from Trinity. I hadn't met him yet. And I had a professor from Trinity call me and say, "Paul, is this person of color?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, you realize there's apartheid there?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess." He said, "Is he going to be okay here? Is he going to be comfortable in this climate?" Well, I went and met him at the airport, and he was a young white man from South Africa. I loved him, just absolutely loved him, the big teddy bear. Well, the first match he plays is against a young man from Botswana who was black. And they go out there, and for 5 games, they just about killed each other. And when the match was over, completely drenched in perspiration, they turned to each other, and they gave each other a big hug. And I said, "You know what? We have our answer. This program is going to be colorblind. We are not. We're just brothers." And it's really a microcosm of how we have to live in this world. We're not better than anyone else. we're not different than anyone else. They all have the same aspirations and goals and dreams. You can imagine when we get into political conversations. I've got a young man on our team whose father was the president of El Salvador. I mean, when we start talking about democracy and Republicans, and they start coming out with stuff, it's like, oh my God, we could never understand or comprehend where they're coming from. We didn't grow up in that world. They didn't grow up in our world. And yet, those relationships are so strong.
It's, you have something there. I kind of wish we could bottle it and distribute it in the world. That's all I can tell you.
Well, we're very, very fortunate. And we sort of changed the game in the U.S. in that when we first started recruiting internationally 17 years ago, there were many international players at many different schools, but now it's really across the board. Franklin and Marshall had 9 international players. St. Lawrence had 9. Yale had 7. You know, you're seeing more and more of it, and the level has gone way up. We have more mature, more world-traveled youngsters. It's been an amazing thing. I won't tell you that the growing pains were not severe.
Mm-hmm.
We faced a lot of prejudice. We faced a lot of, my boy grew up in the country club, and you're depriving him an opportunity to play, and we heard this over and over and over again. But in the end, this isn't a private country club. These are universities and colleges that are obliged to bring in the best and the brightest to add to their student bodies, and that's what we've done.
It's quite a story, and the when you think of the characteristics of a squash player, now your team, multi-ethnic, multinational, different races, different perspectives, and things like that. There's got to be a common denominator there of what you would look for, or what makes a good squash player. And is it that kid-like enthusiasm, or is it, you got to have some natural tools, I can imagine, and, comment on that if you would, please.
Well, if we take the skill sets out, because, every sport has a different skill set. I'm also the tennis coach here, and the skill sets we're looking for there are different than the squash skill sets. But we all are looking for the same animal. We're looking for character-large people. That's really what we're trying to find. Character. What would this young boy do if nobody was watching? That's what the definition of character is to me. Are they going to go out there and give it everything they have and do it with class and dignity? Are they going to represent the college and the program in the right way? When they graduate, are they going to go out and work in the investment world or whatever they're doing and do it right and make the right decisions? And so this is a family. This is the Trinity family, present and future. And we want this family to be character large. And we spend a lot of time looking for those kinds of young men. The boys that graduated from here years ago will call me and they'll say, Coach, there's this young man out here in Mumbai, India, and he's a pretty good squash player, but he's a really good kid, and he's the kind of kid you want in the program. We don't need knuckleheads here. We want guys that are going to represent and be something special, more than just good squash players. And that's where we spend most of our time, is looking for character.
Yeah, and that's another thing. If you can bottle it, what a wonderful world it would be. I couldn't agree with you more. Is this a game really that gets hard on tendons and joints and backs as time goes on? Is that an issue from what you've seen over the years?
Oh yeah, it takes me about 20 minutes to walk about 15 feet to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It's it's horrible on backs, hips, and knees. I've had 5 knee surgeries and 3 back surgeries. And so you see that, the greats, and I'm certainly not a great, but when you see the greats later in life, they're hobbling around. It's a tough, because it's played so low and close to the ground, so you're down low and twisting and turning.
On a hard surface.
It's pretty, it's like tennis and gymnastics in combination. It's very athletic.
And you know, and I know we had this conversation years back, and I'm one of the many that watched the Wide World of Sports growing up years ago, and it was always spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, as Jim McKay would say. And I felt that if it were that type of climate now, you know, your program and the way you've approached it, it would be this little national jewel that would be throughout the world. And I just think it's kind of sad in a way that there's a lot of good college athletics in this particular state, but yet I feel that you bring a dimension to multicultural affairs and multicultural harmony and just a good sport with a lot of different things and character that I really wish that squash had this opportunity to shine on a national level. And have you seen that change over the past couple of years as far as what you may be involved in?
Yeah, well, you're very nice to say that. The game is exploding. There's no doubt in the United States, in the prep schools and the clubs. There's urban squash programs going on all around the country now, about 15 of them, where young people from the urban setting are being taught to play squash and getting one-on-one academic mentoring, in which they ultimately get scholarships to prep schools and then colleges. So that's growing. There is a chance squash will go into the Olympics in September. If that happens,
I was going to ask you, thank you.
Because then the amount of money that the USOC and the promotions that will get in behind it will help our sport become a little more mainstream. There's no doubt about it. You know, it's funny. It would be great to be a much more visible, high-profile sport. But there's a flip side to it, too. You know, last year I did a show with Jen Rosati and Gino Oriema, and at that point we had won 252 consecutive matches. And I think Gino's was up to 86. And someone said, well, what do you think about, you know, Gino's streak there? And I said, well, you know, we've won 3 times as many contests. But that said, I wouldn't trade places with him for anything. Because tonight, when they're playing for the national championship, you know, everyone is going to be sitting in their living rooms with their Yukon hoodies on, screaming and yelling. And nobody knows what we're doing. So the anonymity is actually, it is a little bit nice not to have that kind of pressure on you.
Yeah, I guess as my first wife, my late wife, we used to say, silence is golden and wisdom is riches. You know, it's and it's always that we run out of time in these things. But I like to play this little game occasionally with my guests, and the Martian and the flying saucer coming down. Of course, Martians and flying saucers, I don't even know if they use flying saucers or if there are Martians, but is assigned with finding out Paul Assaiante's best coaching story. And he's got 2 minutes to get back to Mars and bring it to his leader. And what does he tell you, or what do you tell him, shall I say, as far as this is the best story I ever had as a coach?
Well, I'll try to squeeze it into 2 minutes. When I was coaching at West Point, and this is again when we're talking about character, it was a young man that wanted to come to West Point, and he academically really wasn't qualified. His father was a general in the Army, so he had to go to the Army prep school. So he went to the prep school for a year. He arrived a year later. He then went through Beast Barracks, which is beastly. He then played fall tennis for me, and he was okay. He wasn't great. Then that winter, he took boxing class. And while in boxing, he got knocked out. They took him to Walter Reed, and they found that he had 2 spots on the brain. And they did emergency brain surgery on him. And he contacted, I flew out there to see him, and he was in a bad way. A year later, he writes to me and he says, Coach, I want to come back to West Point. I said, well, you know, God bless. That's amazing. He was still walking with a crutch at the time. And so they went back to the academy leadership and they said, this young man wants to come back to West Point. And they said, we'll let him come back to the academy, but he has to go through Beast Barracks all over again. So here's this boy with such a passion. He comes back and goes through Beast Barracks for a second time. He comes out for the tennis team, and really he couldn't hit the ball very well anymore. He had some motor problems, and he was working very hard to fix them. So I kept him on as a manager. because I just loved him, and I just had such respect for him coming back from this adversity. He stayed with us as a manager throughout his cadet career, and in his senior year, he played in a match against the Naval Academy. He is now the Commandant of the Corps of Cadets.
What can you say? You can't comment on a story like that. It's magnificent in and of itself. That's really, in a nutshell, what we're all supposed to do with those that are entrusted to our care. It's magnificent.
You just got to love your kids, but it's more a commentary on him. He refused to give in. He just absolutely refused to give in to anything. And he pushed himself to a point where he is the number 2 man in charge at the United States Military Academy.
It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful story. So I guess you're winding down now to another the end of an academic season, and I did want you to talk about, my producer does say we have several minutes remaining. I understand you're involved now in fundraising for the university, and I would like you to talk about that and your program and your experiences in that regard.
Sure, yeah, I am involved in the fundraising for athletics here at the college. And development and fundraising is nothing more than the cultivation of goodwill. And so I have the good fortune of having a nice story to tell. And I also work at a school that is a wonderful product and an easy sell. And so we go out and we find people who would be inclined and who have capacity to support athletic activities, whether they be endowment or scholarship, or, you know, we raised $16 million to build the beautiful hockey center and $2.5 million to build the synthetic fields, and we just built a brand new tennis center. So it's just basically walking into a room with a person who knows why you're there. They're going to be giving to somebody this year. So the trick is to say, why not us? What can we tell you about what we're doing here that's going to resonate with you and touch your heart in a way that would make you want to give to the college? And the alumni and the parents of current students are so passionate about this wonderful school that the philanthropy is humbling.
And, you know, that's a perfect place to, as we run out of time, to conclude this interview. Why not you? Why not Trinity? Why not Paul Assaiante? Why not the squash program? Why not the legacy of goodwill and the character building of young men and a story that's continuing? Paul, I can't tell you, as always, an honor, a pleasure, and thanks so much. Have a great spring, a great summer, and we'll look to see you again, and we'll keep doing this down the road as these stories develop. I just think it's a fascinating tale.
Well, thank you so much. This is a real honor.
And same here. Thanks very much, Paul. That was Paul Assaiante, Trinity squash coach, and we're so happy to have him here.